Welcome to today's ILTA webinar, 7 Things You Must Do Before Starting Your Next IT Project. I'm Gail Persicelli, and I'll be serving as your moderator. Our speakers today are Ted Theodoropoulos, who is the founder and president of Acrowire, a legal technology consulting firm specializing in custom applications and SharePoint development and design. Paul Bedford, a solutions architect at Acrowire, who has over 25 years of experience in Microsoft technology stack and is an expert at designing portal solutions for law firms using SharePoint and Office 365. And our other speaker is Katrina Dittmeyer. And Katrina is the Senior Manager of Knowledge Management at Fager Baker Daniels. She and her team consult with practice groups and operational departments to best leverage tools and technologies to optimize work process. I would like to thank Acrowire for sponsoring today's webinar. Our presentation will run about 45 to 60 minutes. Please submit all questions to the Q&A box. And if those are not answered during the presentation, they will be addressed at the end. Before we start, please know that we are recording today's webinar and will post a link to our website under recordings shortly after today's presentation. I'll now turn over the webinar to Ted.
Thank you, Gail. So I'd like to also thank everybody for taking a few minutes out of your day to hear the content that we're going to go through today. And let's jump right into introductions. So I'm Ted Theodoropoulos, founder and president of Acrowire. I've been in the technology business for many years. I had some stints at Bank of America in various roles, primarily around risk management and IT audit, operational risk. Also had a stint at Microsoft on the SQL Server team. I've been lucky enough to get nominated for ILTA's Vendor Thought Leader of the Year 3 years in a row. And I'm also a certified Scrum Master and Lean Six Sigma Black Belt. Gail mentioned that we have Katrina Dittmeyer with us today, and Katrina is a senior manager of knowledge management at Fager Baker Daniels. She's also been in the game for quite some time. She's got 20 years experience with law firm technology, and she's got a lot of experience on the intranet, extranet side as well. We also have Paul Bedford from our team. Paul's a senior solutions architect. He's been working with SharePoint and other Microsoft technologies before they had their official names that we all know and love today. So Paul's been around for quite some time. So Acrowire, for those that don't know us, many of you probably do because we're very active in the ILTA community. But we're an IT consulting firm, and we have 3 main areas of practice. So we're actually the largest provider of SharePoint services to legal community, and we really do pretty much soup to nuts everything SharePoint. So custom development, branding, migration, governance. We have something called SharePoint MD, which is kind of a health check for your SharePoint environment. We also do application development. So this varies from greenfield to brownfield system integration. We're doing a lot of NetDocs integration work these days. And then we have an envisioning practice area. And envisioning really kind of aligns pretty closely with the content we're going to talk about today. And really all that has to do with is kind of project leadership and execution. So let's take a look at our agenda for today. We're going to start off with a quick poll, and we've used this particular poll in the past, and it's always an eye-opener. And then we're going to dive into the meat of the presentation. And the first thing that we're going to talk about is communications and why it's so critical. I had a mentor early in my career who used to say that technology is the easy part, and it really is. Communication is one of those first steps that you got to get right. Then we're going to look at gathering key stakeholders and why that's important. We see, especially in the law firm realm, so many new requirements that pop up late in the game, and getting key stakeholders to the table early is crucial in avoiding that. Current and future states, defining what those are, and that sounds like a slam dunk, where I think, folks forget to focus is really baselining current state. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. Risk reward analysis, this is an ILTA webinar, obviously, and there's a lot of technology folks on the line. I think as, technologists, sometimes we emphasize the rewards and don't always emphasize the risks equally. And it's really important that gets done prior to committing the firm's valuable assets and resources to an initiative. So we'll talk through that a little bit. Project expectations, making sure that someone else's unrealistic expectations aren't driving the project. And that's so easy to do, especially in a legal context, because you've got very big personalities that, are the stakeholders, and, and sometimes you can come out of the gate with just doomed for failure. So we'll talk through managing expectations. Understanding vision, being able to articulate a picture that describes the what and the why, and developing a roadmap. We'll describe or we'll talk about why you need to describe how you intend to get to the promised land, because as a stakeholder, if you're rolling out a new intranet, honestly, I really don't care. What I do care about is why and how you intend to do it. So, and then we'll wrap up with a Q&A. So let's start off with a poll here. And the question is, what percentage of IT projects are successful from your experience? So, depending on where you sit, KM, IT, marketing, based on your experience inside legal and out, what percentage of IT projects have been considered a success? And success is a relative term, but, obviously delivering on requirements, meeting budget, and delivering on time are key components of success. So we can focus there. Then Gail, do we have that poll up and running?
Ted, give me 2 seconds and I should have it up for you.
Okay. So the reason we ask this question is, there's always a high standard deviation from the mean. Depending on kind of where you sit and what sort of organizations you've been involved with, there's really a high degree of variation. But there are some official numbers out there from some pretty credible sources that really outline a bit of a sobering picture, but I don't want to skew the results here. So if you can just pick one of the 4 ranges there. So 1 to 25%, 26 to 50, 51 to 75, and then 76 to 100. So in addition to legal represents probably, a half to 2/3 of our business. We also do a lot of work in financial services, shipping, healthcare, and we see a pretty good cross-sectional view of, how other industries do relative to legal with respect to delivering on those 3 objectives, which is, again, meeting deadlines, delivering on requirements, and staying on budget. And to be honest with you, legal's a little bit behind the curve. These are not official numbers and really kind of visceral feel, but this is really why we kind of put so much focus here on the project leadership execution side of things, because again, the technology is the easy part. How are those numbers looking, Gail?
Well, we have about 25% for 76 to 100%, and 37% 51 to 75. That's pretty much, and it's kind of running neck and neck with 26 to 50%.
Interesting. Okay, so those are really optimistic numbers. So there's a organization called the Standish Group, and they have a pretty well-recognized study out there that indicates that 61% of IT projects are considered challenged or complete failures. That's almost 2/3. And again, the criteria is deadline, requirements, and budget. It's just really easy to get off track on one or more of those, and we're going to talk about ways you can avoid that. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Paul so he can dive into the communications piece.
Thanks, Ted. So this slide is all about communications, as Ted just said. It's extremely important at the beginning of a project to articulate to your stakeholders and to the broader community what it is you're trying to achieve, and also why you are trying to do this. You want to get buy-in, you want to get a positive reaction, you want to get support, and if you don't do this, you're going to be asked questions later on, and people are going to be uncertain and not going to understand why they're being asked to do some things. So this is extremely important at the very beginning. You want to be able to articulate how the business was going to be improved for the project, or the solution that's being proposed also. And the way to do this is generally the best way to do this is through a project charter. It's really just a very short document, but it brings together all these components that you can then socialize around the organization to the interested parties. Part of that charter should also deal with how success will be measured. We want to ensure that the people that are writing checks have a clear understanding that that the cost that they've incurred is going to be worth the expense. So it's again really important at the end of the project to be able to articulate that we did succeed and give them some hard data on that, and we will talk about that a little bit later as well. The other piece at this stage as well is to look at the type of project we're undertaking. Is this a strategic initiative? Is it kind of have more of a long-term effect on the business, or is it something that's tactical that has to be achieved very quickly and maybe compromise can be made? So that's very critical to answer those questions. And finally, you want to make sure that the project and the solution that's being proposed is aligned with your organization's objectives, and is going to and isn't going to deviate from those and cause concern for those that are building a strategic plan for the organization, that this is going to move in some other way or some other direction that they are not happy with. So that's what the communications piece is all about. Ted, do you want to add anything to that?
Sorry, Paul, I was on mute there. What I am curious, since I'm gonna put Katrina on the spot here, since a project charter is such a key component of the initialization of a project. Katrina, I'm curious how often you've been around for a while in legal do you see that artifact being leveraged?
At Fakery Baker Daniels, every project has a charter. It includes all of the information really that in some shape or form that we're going to discuss today. We frankly just can't get work off the ground without it.
Makes sense.
So from that perspective, we're probably pretty rigid.
Yeah, and Faegre's a client, and that's been consistent with our interactions. I would say that you guys are a little bit ahead of the curve, but you know, that's not to say that other firms don't. Sometimes they take different forms. You know, they don't call it a project charter; they call it something else. Sometimes it's just a business case. But yeah, Paul, I'd just like to kind of get a feel for it, and I think that, you know, project charters are key for laying the foundation. So you know, if you're not doing it today, I would suggest you look at it closely.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. Okay, so the next point really is to identify your stakeholders for the project, and this goes beyond users, just the users of the solution that you might and the system that you might be implementing. You should also think about other people that may be interacting with the information that this system or solution generates, or have, even if it's just a lateral touch. So people like vendors, your vendors or clients or other outside bodies, partners, etc. Are they going to be affected by the changes that will be coming because of your new solution? Are there other interested parties, such as maybe regulatory or compliance bodies, that would take an interest in your new solution and how it will affect the firm and how business is undertaken? It's really important to understand how the new solution is going to impact the stakeholders, all of your stakeholders. Change is extremely stressful for everybody, and so managing that change and articulating the benefit of the change that your solution is bringing, you know, will it improve processes or the user experience be enhanced? There may be also components of your solution that actually make life a little bit more difficult for some of your users, and it's important to get that information across to them so they understand why you've changed things, perhaps in a negative way from their perception. Now, do they have new things to remember, new processes they have to do, for example, that they might question why is the solution changing? What's the need for this? That's really important. It's also extremely important to understand why your stakeholders care about the project. You know, we just talked about all the impacts it's going to have on them, and that's why they care, right? You're going to change their world. But we also need to understand why we should care as the project team tasked with delivering the solution to the business. Now, obviously, you know, the project success will be judged by our stakeholders. You know, but additionally, our own personal success will be judged. So we as a team are going to be judged. IT, if it's IT, are going to be judged on how well they deliver. Any other pieces of the business that come into this project, they're all going to be judged. You know, did we do the job well? Can the business be confident in us to deliver projects? So again, this is all extremely important to get buy-in from everybody. Katrina, do you want to add anything from your perspective?
Yeah, sure. So a couple of thoughts come to mind. One is, and this is not exactly on project-specific approach, but I completed a usability certification a couple of years ago, and one of the phrases that was used a lot was, know thy users, for they are not you. And so I think that by getting as many people to the table, understanding their perspectives, understanding what do they think this project will look like, what success means for them, how it impacts them, is really important. I mean, we base assumptions based on our frame of reference, on our experience, and that's not everyone's experience. So I think this is really important. And for our organization, when we want to begin a project, we have a section in our kind of project intake process where we're required to list all of our stakeholders and kind of if they're on board with the project or not. And I think that by formalizing that process, it kind of forces us to go out and make sure that we have thought about, and considered all of these other points of view. Because if you don't do it up front, you're going to find out about it at some point in time. And if you do it when the project is in flight, it's just going to be expensive, either in terms of time or money or scope or what have you. So this is such a critical step to a successful project.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if you don't have a clear and complete project vision, you're setting yourself up to fail realistically before you've even started. So I think that's absolutely right.
Paul,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I would add something to that. So one of the more popular service offerings that we have is intranet and extranet design and implementation. And intranets in particular are one of those IT assets that touch everybody inside the firm. So, but we see many times that during the requirements phase of an intranet project, that key contingents are not brought to the table, or they're brought to the table, 2/3 of the way through the requirements process, or sometimes even during implementation. You've got attorneys and paralegals, that's obvious. You've got KM, very obvious. IT, they're the ones who are going to be delivering. So those three are usually at the table. But, you've also got finance, you've got marketing, you've got HR. There are perspectives that, again, sometimes aren't solicited for feedback. And as Katrina mentioned, getting that feedback later in the game obviously increases cost and risk. So a formalized process like the one Faegre leverages is, I think, critical, because sometimes it's just a matter of thinking through it. Like, does finance need to be at the table? This is an intranet project, so there are some branding implications. Do we need marketing? What about HR? And forcing people to check those boxes will add a lot of value in making sure that no one gets left out.
Yep, great, thanks, Ted. All right, so the third point is about the journey. So it's when we talk about the project, we have a current state and we have a future state. And so how do we get from one to the other? And it's not only about the technology. Now, while that's really important, as Ted said before, it's kind of the easy bit in a lot of ways. You obviously need to understand the technology platform that's available in the firm, the constraints around it, and what's possible, and where the firm's going from a technology perspective. But I think you also need to look beyond just the technology. We need to look at the business climate, for example, that the firm is operating in. Is there increased competition in that market? Is that the driver for this solution or this project? Is there growth and change in the firm potentially coming? Are we recruiting more people? Are we looking to be acquisitive and merge with another firm? Is that what's driving this project? We need to look at metrics. We've talked earlier briefly about measuring success. If you don't have a baseline to start from, how do you measure? How do you show that you've made improvements? You need to have some metrics on the front end of the project to be able to compare and contrast with on the back end of the project. We also need to take into account the culture of the firm. Is the firm agile? Can it change quickly, or is change managed in a more restrictive manner within the firm, and so change becomes difficult? It's also important to look at the processes that will be changed by the new solution as well, and map those out also. So, as I said, the technology is important, of course, but these other pieces are just as important, and we often see them not being taken into account. Katrina?
Sure. So assuming that you have engaged these varied stakeholders that we talked about in the slide prior, those stakeholders will really, I think, help frame these other perspectives. They will give you a point of view that you may not have relative to things like the business climate or competition or even organizational strategies. So it goes back to that prior slide about getting everyone at the table that needs to be. On the metric side of things, this is a topic near and dear to my heart, but I always think about, if you don't, what is the phrase? If you don't measure it, how can you manage it? And if your project is to, improve a process or to, increase a return or decrease leverage or whatever it is, know what that thing is, what that metric, what that number is that you're trying to put pressure on, and measure it. Do your best to measure it up front. Sometimes if you are introducing a new project, maybe because you want to get better and you don't have a great baseline, do your best to come up with a baseline. If it's a process improvement, do a time study. Maybe you don't have logs or analytics that give you that information regularly or automatically, but do a time study, do an A/B study, do something that helps you set a current state so that when you implement the new project, measure again, but measure against those same things so that you know that you've accomplished, an important objective of the project.
Right.
So I'll add to that, Paul, and just one of the disciplines that was driven into my head during my years at Bank of America with their Six Sigma adoption is defining measurable success criteria in advance of the project. So you would have a primary and secondary metric. Maybe it's we see this in one of the reasons why people embark on intranet redesigns is adoption. They have very poor adoption in their existing environment, and they want to make put more relevant content and improve the user experience, and ultimately they want to drive adoption, which will increase business value. Well, instead of just saying, yes, we want to improve adoption, you need to take the next step and say, by how much? Okay, what is it today, to Katrina's point? And then where do we expect it to be after our improvements? And the reality is sometimes it's a bit of a guessing game, but it's always good to have targets. And and it's also helpful to your career when you can demonstrate that, hey, this is what we set out to do, and we accomplished it. Or if we came up short, here's why. But having formal success criteria on the front end of a project is a very good idea.
Thanks, Ted. So the next topic is risk, and as Ted pointed out earlier, it's I think it was Ted or Katrina, anyway, one of us. We don't often talk about risk, and it gets avoided. We focus on success. So at the beginning of a project as well, creating a risk register around perceived risks to the project success, and maintaining that as the project progresses rather, is a critical part of all this as well. We want to understand what happens if we fail. Well, how will that impact the firm if the project fails? What are the what's going to happen? Are we going to lose business? Are we going to lose money? Are we going to have to get rid of people, basically? But also, what happens if we succeed? Because even if we succeed, there's going to be change. So what does that mean as well? Is there a risk associated with success? Are there other places in the firm where this new solution is going to have impact? We need to make sure we address those. We also should ask the question, what happens if we don't do anything at all? We don't have to do these projects, right? It's not necessarily always critical. Can the project be put off? Can the firm afford not to do it Is it going to be? Is that a viable option as well? I think it's critical to understand that at the beginning of the project also. And the other question that I don't think gets asked a lot is, why didn't we do it already? If this is a project that's been popping up several times for consideration but never was implemented, what were the reasons for that? Are those reasons, and why, and how have those things changed? What makes it viable now? So understanding that is important. The constraints and understanding, the magic triangle, if you will, the cost, time, and scope, and making sure that we understand the balance there. And if the triangle is out of kilter, if you will, if we have a financial constraint, we need to be very clear and plan for that. For example, we also need to understand if there are any constraints placed upon us by outside regulatory or compliance bodies as well. And then it's kind of going back to the stakeholders that we've been talking about, bringing everybody in. We want to understand exactly what we're trying to solve for who. A lot of times projects end up running and they solve problems that we've never been asked to solve because we think we know what the problem is and we think we know what the people need. So getting that clear vision of what it is the project is trying to solve and for who is important. And that helps us to understand what makes all this effort worthwhile, the cost and the time and the energy that all our project team is going to put into it, plus the people from the business that are going to help us, the stakeholders. It's really important. Katrina or Ted, do you have anything?
Sure.
Go
ahead,
Go ahead,
Ted.
Katrina. Okay.
One of the things.
This is like an awkward dance. You go first.
I will go. Just real quick. One of the things that maybe we need to consider on that point of kind of why haven't we already done this, and maybe not because we haven't thought of it as a project before, is also being aware of other projects that are in flight or that might have an impact on the success of this one. People can only consume or adapt to so much change at a time. And our other projects competing for that same change tolerance. And I think that's something that firms need to be cognizant of. I'm fortunate in that our organization is highly structured in this, and we have a firm-wide kind of project roadmap with benchmark timings included. So we can either group projects together that might be related, or we can spread them out if we think that's too much change in one area for people to deal with. So I think that's another thing to consider in the risk category. Ted.
So thank you. So one of the things that is not listed on here, but I think is very relevant, that cloud comes to mind here. And the thing that I'm touching on is the perceived risks. Are the perceived risks real? And how are we moving the dial? So obviously cloud is a hot topic in legal, and we see firms that want to go in that direction, especially from the IT side, but there's a reluctance on the business side, and it makes a lot of sense to evaluate whether or not those perceptions are valid, and try and make a case. And the reason I use cloud as the example, because it's a good one in terms of perception. So a lot of the resistance that or underlying a lot of the resistance is the lack of control creates discomfort, and firms automatically assume that clients of the firms would be uncomfortable with the firm not being able to walk them over and point exactly where their data lives. And that's not always the case. and we see the clients of AcroWire who have kind of pushed those perceptions aside and gone down the road. Firms are passing client audits with hybrid and cloud infrastructure, and sometimes, I would say probably most of the time, the risk profile actually improves when leveraging cloud infrastructure. And that's not to say that there's still not questions that have to be answered, but the perception isn't always the reality. So, as much emphasis as we're putting here on evaluating risks, I think the flip side of that is challenge certain risks. And there's data. ILTA does a great job at putting together a technology survey. All you have to do is flip through that. And it's a long document, but you flip through that and you'll see that there are firms venturing into those waters, and they're being successful. And clients aren't just leaving en masse because they've leveraged a hybrid or cloud component of their architecture.
Thanks.
Can I add one other point on that, Paul?
Sure.
I think this goes also towards projects that are kind of innovative in nature. We want to dip our toes into a new technology or a new process, and say that up front. That we're not sure where this is going to take us, but we know that if we do nothing, we're going to be exactly where we are today, and we're not comfortable with that either. So just, don't shy away from projects because there is some unknown. Even if something, I'm kind of air quoting here, fails, how much did we learn along the way, and how informative is that towards the success of the next project or a different approach at trying to accomplish the same thing? And I know that in legal, we tend to be pretty conservative where kind of innovation is concerned. But I see some movement in that space, and I think this is where we define it.
Thank you. Okay, the next slide is all about what is the truth. We've touched on preconceptions in the past on several slides, and it's true that we have, as a project team or the solution delivery team, we have a certain preconceptions about what it is the solution should be, what the problem is, so on and so forth. It's important to understand that our stakeholders will also come to the table with their preconceptions. They will already think they know what the problem is and they know what the solution should be. They will come with preconceptions about us, about the team, and whether they believe we can deliver for them. So it's critical to uncover these preconceptions and expose them and discuss them, turn them over, and get everybody to understand reality, be on the same page. We had a meeting with a prospective client not too long ago where we sat down with the project team and started to discuss the issues at hand, how they felt like we could help them, what the problem was they were trying to solve, and what solutions that they felt were appropriate. And after, 15, 20 minutes or so of discussion, the CIO came into the room and into the meeting, and it was immediately obvious that he had a very different idea of what the problem was. He had a very different idea of how the solution would look to the project team. And the interesting thing about all this is that nobody had actually spent the time to do any envisioning, to do any research, to talk to stakeholders, beyond some very light discussions, corridor discussions, if you like. And so everybody around the table had an idea of what was needed and what the problem was, but nobody had reality to hand to talk about. And so we have to make sure we understand our stakeholders. How do they define success? What do they want? What time frame do they want it in? Will they compromise? If we can't give them everything they want, can we compromise on time or cost? So, is that all, Katrina?
I consider this slide really about proactive conflict management. When you ask for stakeholder engagement, involvement, the likelihood that they all have, all agree on what the project should look like or what the outcome is. This is really about having those discussions, having those negotiations up front before the project begins, because they will come out at some point in time, and let's manage for that ahead of time.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is, it's not if they're willing to compromise should be the question. It's what, and a good way to do that is by stack ranking. One of the first things that we ask a customer when we start a pre-sales discussion around an IT project is, what's most important to you? If you're using the iron triangle that Paul referenced earlier, is it cost? Is it timeline? Is it scope? And if they say all three, if everything's a priority, then nothing's a priority. So forcing people to stack rank is a great way to uncover, true priorities, and without it, you're putting yourself at a disadvantage.
Great.
Ted, do you go back and refer to that stack rank throughout the project? Kind of like we agreed on this up front?
So to use the iron triangle metaphor again, for us, that is always an expectation management tool, so that if we get, part way down the path and realize that there are a whole new set of requirements or requirements change, and a customer has indicated that the number one objective for them is cost or timeline management, then we point back to, hey, listen, guys, maybe changing direction here is not the right strategy. Maybe we ought to, reevaluate whether or not this is a true need or not. So, yeah, for us, it is, as vendors, we get put in sometimes the difficult position of, pushing back on, change that the client wants. And if we haven't identified up front, what the stack ranking is, around the iron triangle, then we're really not on solid ground to do it. So that's kind of how we use the stack ranking of those three objectives.
Thanks.
So we've got a lot of information now from our stakeholders, from our envisioning process, and so now it's important to paint the picture of what our solution, what the world is going to look like with our solution in place. Obviously we hope to be able to demonstrate improvements for the business and the firm, but we also want to articulate what's different, what's going to change for our client, our clients, which are the users in the firm. It's also important here to try and understand how the solution will meet future needs. Now, we can't obviously look around corners and see the future, but we should be aware of things that are happening around us. If we know the firm is in a period of growth, and there will be, new users to come in and require new processes, or we're going to acquire a firm or merge with a firm in a different market that would bring in new business. We want to be aware of that, even if it's not going to happen in the lifetime of our project delivery. If it's going to happen in the next 12 to 24 months, for example, we want to make sure that we're putting things in place to cope with that. We also, going back to the previous conversation slightly about the iron triangle and change, we need to be able to force, I'm going to use the word force, a policy decision from the stakeholders and how that change is managed. There will be change, right? There will be requirements change that come along during the delivery of the project or the implementation of the project. So how are we going to manage those? Are we going to be agile? Are we going to adjust course with small changes, or are we, going to accept no changes? And if there are changes that are needed, they'll be dealt with after the project is delivered as another project, for example. So it's really important that before anybody does any work on the project, that the policy for change is agreed and understood by all parties involved. Ted?
So I'll just make a kind of a brief comment here is sometimes we get a little bit of pushback on, this isn't just from law firms, this is really, I guess, kind of industry agnostic on going through these steps, before actually things are getting written, because certain stakeholders need to see or have a desire to see progress, and they don't necessarily view these planning activities as progress. And I would just say that it's important to articulate why exactly you're doing the things that you're doing, and that it is adding value. And again, as vendors, we sometimes are that means spending money, but the ROI is there. So articulating that in an effective way is going to get key to get people to participate. When you talk about forcing a policy decision during a pre-project conversation, some people are like, "Oh, we'll deal with that later." So just be prepared to explain why. It's my only feedback.
Right. Katrina, do you have anything you want to add?
Well, I just want to tag on to one of the things that Ted said about kind of making the investment in really these are, pre-project or design discussions, is there are so many studies that reinforce that the more time you spend up front, defining requirements, understanding stakeholder perspectives, all kinds of ways to phrase that, absolutely worth it. You will spend more in the back end if you avoid these conversations up front. And if your firm maybe is hesitant to make that upfront investment, Google is your friend. The studies are out there. The numbers support it. Do your best to really put pressure on leadership to front load projects, and your success criteria or success factor goes up significantly.
Thank you. And so the last of the 7 is the last task you would do as part of the envisioning is create a plan. And so Ted talked about stack ranking, risk, and so on. And so here we want to make sure we document and stack rank, the risks that we've identified and how they will be mitigated, but also, stack rank stakeholder impacts as well, and solution capabilities and business outcomes, where this will help you get through the conversations and decisions that will be needed to successfully navigate through change and compromise with the stakeholders. And by this time as well, you should have a really clear view of the project scope and the requirements, and it'll allow you to assemble your project team, assign roles and responsibilities. And while you're not yet ready to be able to create a detailed project plan, you are able to create a roadmap with milestones and a timeline for the project. And all this together with all the other information will allow you and support you in going to ask for the money to actually do the project, to get your budget. Katrina, do you want to add anything?
No, I mean, this is really important. And at Baker Daniels, all of these steps that we've talked about, these are really requirements for us to even request budget. To get project approval, we have to do, a lot of work ahead of time. And by the time we have budget, approval, we're really kind of ready to start the project. We've laid a good foundation already. And so we're not doing this kind of after the fact.
And I'll just add to that, from a vendor perspective, budget is one of the items that comes up frequently during conversations. And, we get asked many times to provide a, it's a very reasonable request. If I was on the customer side of the table and didn't have as much perspective of the vendor side, I'd be asking for the same thing. But, it's reasonable for a customer to ask for numbers for budgeting purposes. But where I think things get out of alignment is, during initial conversations where there's a really limited perspective on the vendor. It doesn't even have to be the vendor. This could be, your internal IT group, and your executive committee is pushing for budget. Taking a swag is perfectly acceptable, but it's important to add to that the margin of error, given how much of this kind of pre-flight work has been done. So, and that's again where the stack ranking comes in. So if you know ahead of time that cost is going to be the #1 objective through which success will be measured, then we got to have some flexibility around scope and/or timeline, but more likely scope. So, as far as agreeing on the budget, make sure that whatever budget is agreed upon, that there's a very good understanding of the margin of error, and the margin of error is going to be driven by how far you are down the requirements path and how much engineering has been done. It's not, you still can't give anyone a budget number from a requirements document. There's actual engineering that has to be done. So you've got your requirements document. Now you need to build a solution concept, right? And if you haven't done that, if you just have the requirements, then you're further upstream, which means you're further upstream in that cone of uncertainty. So the variation is going to be higher. So just make sure that the agreed upon budget, again, this is very important from a vendor perspective, but that the margin of error is included in that conversation.
All right, and that's our 7 things you should do before you start your next project. Ted, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you. So, we talked a lot about pre-project activities that you can think about prior to your next initiative. And we covered a lot of ground here, but we really tried to keep things kind of high level and use everyday language so that the content is useful. The reality is that project leadership and execution it's not easy. And, if it were, there wouldn't be a 61% failure rate. And the reality is sometimes you need help. So, Paul, if you want to advance the slide, I mentioned earlier on the call that we have a service called Envisioning. We're not the only ones out there that do this, and this is not intended to be a commercial for AcroWire, but many vendors, including AcroWire, have a well-established process that has been proven to deliver successful outcomes. And a lot of times there's intellectual property that vendors can bring to the table to help you mature your project leadership and execution practices. So even if you don't choose AcroWire, consider a vendor if you feel like you may need help, and I think it will be money well spent. So now we can jump into the questions and answers. And Gail, is there anything that folks need to do specifically to get questions to us?
Just if you have a question for them, just enter it into the Q&A box and we'll address them. Hello? Hello?
We can hear you. We
Oh,
can hear you,
okay.
Gail.
It was just dead silence. I got worried I got disconnected. Yeah, we have the Q&A. We do have one question in there. Do you want to take that, Ted? Can you see
So
the
I'm not
Q&A?
seeing it.
Okay.
Yeah,
It's
maybe you can ask it, because I see something about a miss.
okay.
Slide,
B. Moody asked, had to step away, missed previous slide number 4. Will this will be available for later just download? Okay, I can handle that. Yes, we'll get that presentation from Ted and have it posted with the recording. Okay, I took care of that. Now the next one is, do you have any preferred project management software?
Yeah. So I'll tell you some. There are so many project management platforms out there, and it constantly changes. So I mean, there's a lot of really good ones, and it really depends on your methodology. If you're take a more of a waterfall approach to project management, obviously MS Project. There are a ton of tools in that direction. If you're more agile and you're building out user stories and epics, and you're managing things in sprints, then something like a Liquid Planner or a Jira Studio or an Asana work really well. And something else to consider, is this an infrastructure or an application development project? On the app dev side, we use Team Foundation Server or Visual Studio Online, but that paradigm doesn't really fit with like a SharePoint project. So my answer is it depends. Katrina, do you guys, what do you use for project management software at Faegre?
Same answer. It depends. Some projects use MS Project. Some use Excel. Hate to say it, I'm almost cringing there. We have some templates in SharePoint that we use, and we've had some projects with third-party vendors where we've used Smartsheets. So it's been kind of a mixed bag here as well.
Yeah, and we tend to use SharePoint extranets to manage project along with, as Katrina said, either an Excel spreadsheet, sometimes if their client's more comfortable with that, or MS Project also.
Okay, we have another question. What requirement gathering techniques are the most successful?
I'll give my spiel, and then I'll kick it over to Katrina to give her perspective. So that's a really good question. In the Six Sigma world, we use something called JAD sessions, joint. I forget what JAD stands for now, but essentially it's bringing together a focus group of stakeholders and having dialogue with an agenda. It's not just get a bunch of people in the room and talk about the project. Have it structured, have it focused, and have a sampling of each contingent. So I mentioned all the contingents earlier: attorneys, KM, IT, finance, marketing, HR. You're not going to get to talk to everybody, so user surveys are a great way to collect feedback from the folks that you can't talk to face to face, and that's part of the intellectual property that a vendor could potentially help you out with. What about from your perspective, Katrina?
Well, not dissimilar. We have kind of a probably not formally documented as well as it should be, but an assumption of personas. So what are the kind of primary types of users in our organization, and we will interview those folks again with an agenda, and make sure that we're collecting feedback and getting the insights of those different kind of persona groups, and then that goes into our kind of requirement stack.
Okay, I have one last question. CJ5 asked, I am working towards my PMP. However, my organization does not really use project management techniques. Our SMEs act act as project managers, and unfortunately, my projects are not high priority, and I struggle to get them onto the table. What suggestions do you have for achieving my 3,500 project hours?
Wow, that's a tough one. Yeah, I'm not sure that I can. That's an organizational challenge. That 3,500 project hours. That's a big chunk of work. If ultimately your goal, your professional aspirations can't be achieved at your current organization, because I don't think you're going to change the organization, I would look for another job. You may really like where you work, but you got to balance that with how important obtaining your PMP is, and whether or not you're going to get the proper support at your existing firm. And if that's more important to you than working at that particular firm, then maybe it's worth considering a move. That would be my only feedback. You have anything, Katrina, on that?
No, not really. I guess I would look at, again, what are your overall goals? If you're funding your PMP on your own, kind of what are you expecting to get out of that investment, and make decisions based on those goals. It's why I don't have my PMP.
Okay, that's it for questions. I want to thank everybody for attending. Ted, Paul, Katrina, thank you for the great presentation. And just remember, shortly after today's webinar, you'll receive a evaluation. Please take a few minutes to complete. This helps us provide educational programming. And I think that's it. So everyone have a great day, and we'll see you on the next webinar. Thanks, Ted, Paul, and Katrina.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.